Hello everyone, let's talk about Saint Anselm and Saint Thomas Aquinas. So first, let's talk about Saint Anselm. Saint Anselm was born in 1033 near Aosta, in those days a Burgundian town on the frontier with Lombardy. He was the outstanding Christian philosopher and theologian of the 11th century. He is best known for the celebrated ontological argument for the existence of God in the Proslogion, but his contributions to philosophical theology go well beyond the ontological argument. Ontological argument means these are arguments from what are typically alleged to be none but analytic, a priori and necessary premises to the conclusion that God exists. Saint Anselm left home at 23, and after 3 years of apparently aimless traveling through Burgundy in France, he came to Normandy in 1059. In Normandy, Anselm's interest was captured by the Benedictine Abbey at Bec, located between Rouen and Lisieux and Normandy, France, whose famous school was under the direction of Lanfranc. Who is Lanfranc? Lanfranc was a scholar and teacher of wide reputation, and under his leadership the school at Bec had become an important center of learning, especially in dialectic. In 1060, Anselm entered the monastery as beginner. His intellectual and spiritual gifts brought him rapid advancement. In 1063, when Lanfranc was appointed abbot of Caen, Anselm was elected to succeed him as prior. In 1078, he was elected as abbot upon the death of Herluin, the founder and first abbot of Bec. Under Anselm's leadership, the reputation of Bec as an intellectual center grew, and Anselm accomplished to write a good deal of philosophy and theology in addition to his teaching, administrative duties, and extensive correspondence as an advisor and counselor to rulers and nobles all over Europe and beyond. In 1093, Anselm was inaugurated as Archbishop of Canterbury. The previous archbishop, Anselm's old master Lanfranc, had died 4 years earlier, but the King William Rufus had left the position vacant in order to plunder the archiepiscopal revenues. King William was intent on maintaining royal authority over ecclesiastical affairs and would not be dictated to by archbishop or pope or anyone else. In 1100, King William was killed and his successor, Henry I, invited Anselm to return to meet him. But Henry was as intent as William in maintaining royal jurisdiction over the church, and Anselm found himself in exile again from 1103 to 1107. Despite these distractions and troubles, Anselm continued to write. His works as Archbishop of Canterbury include the Epistola de Incarnatione Verbe, Cordius Homo, De Concepto Virginale, De Processione Spiritus Sancte, the Epistola de Sacrificio Azime et Fermentate, De Sacramentes Ecclesiae, De Concordia. Anselm's motto, faith seeking understanding, fides quaerens intellectum. This motto lends itself to at least two misunderstandings. First, many philosophers have taken it to mean that Anselm hopes to replace faith with understanding. But Anselm is not hoping to replace faith with understanding. Faith for Anselm is more a volitional state than an epistemic state. It is love for God and a drive to act as God's will. In fact, Anselm describes that sort of faith that merely believes what it ought to believe as dead. So faith-seeking understanding means something like an active love of God seeking a deeper knowledge of God. Other philosophers have noted that faith-seeking understanding begins with faith, not with doubt or suspension of belief. Hence, they argue that theistic arguments proposed by faith-seeking understanding are not really meant to convince unbelievers. They are intended solely for the enlightenment of those who already believe. For although the theistic proofs are born of an active love of God seeking a deeper knowledge of the beloved, the proofs themselves are intended to be convincing even to the unbelievers. Thus, Anselm opens the Monologion. Monologion was originally entitled A Monologue on the Reason for Faith or Monoloquium di Ratione Fide, and sometimes also known as an example of meditation on the reason for faith. Exemplo Meditante di Ratione Fide was written in 1075 and 1076. It was both apologetic and religious in intent. It attempted to demonstrate the existence and attributes of God by an appeal to reason alone rather than by the customary appeal to authorities favored by earlier medieval thinkers. Moving from an analysis of the inequalities of various aspects of perfection, such as justice, wisdom, and power, Anselm argued for an absolute norm that is everywhere at all times, above both time and space, a norm that can be comprehended by the human mind. Anselm asserted that the norm is God, the absolute ultimate and integrating standard of perfection. Next is Proslogion, address or allocution, originally titled Fides Quaerens Intellectum or Faith-Seeking Understanding, established the ontological argument for the existence of God. He claimed that even a fool has an idea of being greater than which no other being can be conceived to exist. Such a being, he argued, must really exist, for the very idea of such a being implies its existence. Freedom, Sin, and Redemption. On freedom of choice. Anselm defines freedom of choice as the power to preserve rectitude of will for its own sake. He explores the idea of righteousness of will most thoroughly in On Truth. So in order to understand the definition of freedom of choice, we must look first at Anselm's discussion of truth. Truth is a much broader notion for Anselm than for us. He speaks of truth not only in statements and opinions, but also in the will, actions, the senses, and even the essences of things. In every case, he argues truth consists in correctness or rectitude. Rectitude in turn is understood theologically. A thing is correct whenever it is or does whatever it ought or was designed to be or do. Anselm points out that freedom of choice neither is nor entails the power to sin. God and the good angels have freedom of choice, but they are incapable of sinning. But if free choice is the power to hold on to what is fitting and expedient, and it is not the power to sin, does it make any sense to say that the first human beings and the rebel angels sinned through free choice? Anselm famously attempts to show on purely rational grounds that the debt incurred by human sin could be suitably discharged, and the affront to God's infinite dignity could be suitably rectified only if one who was both fully divine and fully human took it upon himself to offer his own life on our behalf. Anselm claims that we are still free because we continue to be such that if we had rectitude of will, we could preserve it for its own sake. But we cannot exercise our freedom since we no longer have the rectitude of will to preserve. So, the restoration of human beings to the justice they were intended to enjoy requires divine grace, but even more is needed than God's restoration of the will for justice. Saint Anselm died on 21st of April 1109, and he was canonized in 1494 and named a doctor of the Church in 1720. Next, let's talk about St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas was born in 1225 at Roccasecca, a hilltop castle from which the great Benedictine Abbey of Monte Cassino is not quite visible, midway between Rome and Naples. At the age of 5, he was interred at Monte Cassino, where his studies began. When the monastery became a battle site, not for the last time, Thomas was transferred by his family to the University of Naples. It was here that he came into contact with the new Aristotle and with the order of preachers or Dominicans, a recently founded mendicant order. St. Thomas Aquinas was a Catholic priest in the Dominican order and one of the most important medieval philosophers and theologians. He was immensely influenced by scholasticism and Aristotle and known for his synthesis of the two aforementioned traditions. Although he wrote many works of philosophy and theology throughout his life, his two monumental works are Summa Theologica and Summa Contra Gentiles. But his most influential work is the Summa Theologica that extensively discusses man, which consists of 3 parts. It includes God, ethics, and Christ. His teachings are currently used in ethics, civil law, religious morality, and politics. He is a bachelor and master in theology. He is one of 33 doctors of the Catholic Church. He is sometimes called the angelic doctor and the prince of scholastics. This Italian philosopher and theologian produced works that have made him the most important figure in scholastic philosophy and one of the leading Roman Catholic theologians. He is also the father of natural law theory. Natural law is what is naturally right or wrong. It isn't just revealed through religion or scripture. It is hardwired into the hearts and minds of all human beings by God. Everyone's conscience should naturally tell them right from wrong. Reason helps us discover God's truth. Religion should not be irrational. There is no conflict between reason and true religion. Philosophy and theology. St. Thomas proposed 5 positive statements about the divine qualities or the nature of God. God is simple, without composition of parts such as body and soul or matter in form. God is perfect, lacking nothing. God is infinite and not limited in the ways that created beings are physically, intellectually, and emotionally limited. God is immutable, incapable of change and respect of essence and character. God is one, such that God's essence is the same as God's existence. Next is Thomistic philosophy. Man is substantially body and soul. The soul is united with the human body because it is the substantial form of the human body. It is the principle of action in the human body and the principle of life of the body. But the soul, however, requires the body as the material medium for its operation, particularly perception. Soul has operative function which do not need a material medium. They are the man's intellect and will. Thus at death, intellection and will remain in the soul, which is immortal, simple, and incorruptible. Body and soul before death are basically united because the two exist in a correlative manner. Faith and philosophy. The difference between a religious belief and a philosophical one can be thought of as a question of authority. Christianity places authority on revelation via scripture primarily. Philosophy places authority on reason and our ability to make or rather observe logical connections. Aquinas posits two modes of knowing, reason and revelation. Reason or scientia, many things can be known by means of philosophical demonstration and empirical observation. Revelation or sapientia, some things can only be known by God making them known to us, like Trinity and Incarnation. Aquinas and morality. His morality is also very close to that of Aristotle's thoughts on justice, which leads him to distinguish between distributive justice, that which divides the honors, riches according to the qualities of each. Commutative justice, the rule that economic exchanges under the equal proportion principle. Thomas' moral doctrine is primarily eudaimonistic and virtue-based. Eudaimonistic means the ethical doctrine that the basis of morality lies in the tendency of right actions to produce happiness, especially in a life governed by reason rather than pleasure. Thomas and Aristotle. As a philosopher, Thomas is emphatically Aristotelian. He was greatly influenced by the works of Aristotle. Aristotle explained what things are, Aquinas explained how they got that way. For him, God did it. But Aquinas thinks there is a fundamental mistake in Aristotle's metaphysics. Aquinas thinks Aristotle overlooks the notion of existence. Aristotle on existence. Form is what actualizes a potentiality, matter into an actually existing thing. And efficient causes are what bring a particular substance into being. But the world existing eternally has no efficient cause. Existence is just born in its form. St. Thomas Aquinas died at the age of 49 on March 7, 1274, in Fossa Nova, 20 kilometers from birthplace. He was canonized July 18, 1323, feast day January 28, and formerly March 7. So for St. Thomas Aquinas, to one who has faith, no explanation is necessary. To one without faith, no explanation is possible. So here are our references. Thank you so much.
Ride till I ain't no more gone. More gone.